Giniw Magnog, Mikwuminsikwe, Indigo, Giniw Dudem, Odawa Zagay Ganingin Donjiba, Igun Shigamud and Dad. My very first spirit name is Mikwuminsikwe, and it means little ice woman. My English name is Sharyl, and I'm Eagle Clan, originally from LCO, Wisconsin. I've spent a lot of my life living in Minnesota, but more recently I've just moved to Hudson in the last 2 years to help take care of my mom, who's in her 80s and just needs a little bit of extra help. So I work at the American Indian Family Center in St. Paul. I'm a treatment counselor and addictions counselor for the Khunsi Onikan women's outpatient program there. I'm really honored to be asked to come and share with you all tonight some of the things that I've been blessed to learn, and I feel like that's kind of the goal, or maybe the mission sometimes, that we're here to learn and then pass it on. And so all the gratitude that I feel has to do with the wonderful, wonderful teachers that I've had in my life. And I had a drive to want to learn. So I think the best place for me to start is to share that we left LCO and moved to Minnesota when I was 5 years old. And it was an attempt on my parents' part to do a little geographic relocation, thinking that would fix my dad's alcoholism and wild ways, I guess, maybe would be a way to put it. But unfortunately, for any of you that have ever dealt with alcoholism or addiction in your families, geographic relocation doesn't work. So so I grew up in a family where the culture hadn't been passed down. Our family was a product of boarding school era for at least 2 generations, from my grandmother and my great-grandmother. And so at the time that my dad was born, my grandparents were not feeling like it was a positive thing to do to pass any culture down, because you would be targeted for bad things to happen to you. But what they did pass down was the alcoholism and the woundedness that was passed to them. And so I grew up with 2 alcoholic parents, and with just about every kind of abuse that you can imagine that was going on in my childhood. And I share that because it does have meaning in the journey of my life and what I've done with chosen to do with my life. That in the beginning, I did not have a choice what was handed to me. We just had all of the fallout, I would say, from historical trauma and intergenerational trauma, and I didn't get the good stuff. I did, however, have a best friend whose family was everything that I dreamed of. Her family powwowed all summer long. Neither of her parents were alcoholics. They were really into the culture. They were wonderful people who treated me like I was a part of their family. And so I did get a glimpse of something. And I remember when I was a little girl thinking, if I ever have a family, this is what I want it to be like. I also, even though I wasn't learning things, people weren't passing down cultural pieces to me or spiritual pieces to me, I did have experiences even in childhood that were different. When the physical abuse and the sexual abuse would get really bad, sometimes when I remember this, like before I was 5 years old, going out into the woods and laying on the ground and just wishing that I could stop breathing because I didn't want to be alive. And then these people would come and whisper to me things in my ear, and they would say, "Don't give up, my girl. You're not alone. We're with you. We love you. We're proud of you. But you have to get up and you have to go back because there's some things that you're supposed to do someday." And I don't know what I would have done if it wasn't for them. I didn't know who they were when I was little. I just thought of them as grandmas and grandpas because they looked older, right? And later in my adult life, I did find out that indeed they were, at least a couple of them. I've seen pictures. I later in my life saw pictures of my great grandmother, and she was the main one. She had long hair way past her knees, and she was the main one that kept me alive. And what I didn't know was at the time was that that's how she died. She died because her husband was an alcoholic and he was really violent, and he because of the violence of the physical abuse that he inflicted on her, she ended up dying. So she came back to help me survive it. So at the point of time when I bottomed out with my own alcoholism, because there came a time when I couldn't cope with the things that were happening in our family, and I turned to drinking as well, and then getting high later as a way to escape. And I had an event. I was very suicidal. I didn't want to be alive, and I had an experience where I was planning the perfect suicide, all hungover one morning after a night when I had been sexually assaulted again. And I had a spiritual experience happen to me as I was trying to plan this perfect suicide. And it felt like Creator, I knew what it was, even though prior to that, I did not have any education or a relationship with God or Gije Manidu or Gichu Manidu or Creator. But I heard this message really loud that every single painful thing in your life is getting at you through alcohol. If you get that out of your life, you're going to be okay. And I stopped in my tracks at that moment, and I thought about it, and I thought every violence and every abuse and every horrible thing in my life, it was true. It was there. Alcohol was bringing it. And so for the first time in my life, I had like this little light inside of me that just kind of flared up, and I wanted to live. And so I reached out for help, and there wasn't money at the time. This was a long time ago. There wasn't money to send me to treatment. And so someone told me, well, you should do old school way and go to 90 meetings in 90 days and get a sponsor and do what she says and all of that. And I did that. And so I detoxed, and because I was at this Alano Club where I lived, going to meetings 1 or 2 a day for 3 months straight. I met a lot of different people, and I started learning how to deal with life in another way besides trying to numb out or run away. But the other thing that I knew as soon as I started clearing my mind was I knew I needed my culture, and I wanted it. Somehow I just knew that that was where a lot of my answers would come from. And so I started going to sweats, and I got my first Indian name, and I started dancing at powwows, and trying to think, in those early days, there were ceremonies too. You know, I right about that time, I had moved to the Minneapolis metro area, and there was a lot more access to things. And I was meeting some really, I have to tell you, I did meet some scary people. There was this one lady, but I need to share it because then you'll understand more about who I am and kind of why I do things the way that I do them. I was a really young woman at the time, and I had 2 little babies, and I was a single parent, and there was nobody there. I had no family in the metro area. And so we were, I forget, me and some of my other young Native women friends, we were hanging out, and there was an elder lady who said, "You girls, are you looking for someone to, you know, give you teachings?" And we were like, "Yeah, we are." We were just like sponges looking for, you know, culture. And she goes, "Well, I'll be your teacher." And so she started having us come over to her house, and only she was mean. She was so mean. She would swear at us and yell at us. And she told me that because I fed my children when I was on my moon time, that my kids were going to get sick, and if I kept doing it, they were going to die. And I freaked out because I totally believed her because she was an elder, right? And I was so hungry for my culture and vulnerable. I felt like now people talk about having anxiety attacks and things like that, but I was really, I don't know if that's what it was, but I was having a really hard time with her yelling this at me, and I believed it. And I was telling another friend of mine about it, and she said, "Oh my God, Sharyl, who are you talking to?" And I told her the name of the lady, and she said, "Sharyl, what are you doing going to her? She's a raging alcoholic." And I was like, "Well, I didn't know. Nobody told me." She said, "I know somebody you should go see." She said, "I want you to go see Kendall and Lillian Rice." Well, I had already seen them at some ceremonies before, but I took her advice, and I called, and I went over to see them at their house with some tobacco. And this piece right here is that I will tell you, this is an important piece for me because I have used this to guide my cultural and spiritual life ever since. And Lillian was quiet spoken, you know. I mean, they adopted us, and we adopted them, and I am so grateful that they were such a big influence and such great teachers in my life. But Kendall was doing most of the talking in this initial visit, and he was saying, I told him the story of what happened, and he said, "Oh, my girl." He goes, he was shaking his head, and he said, "We have many words for God or creator." He said, "My favorite one, and it is now my favorite one as well," he said, "is Gije Manidu." And he said, the closest I can translate that into English is kind, loving, compassionate creator. He said, do you think that a kind, loving, compassionate creator is going to hurt your innocent child for something that you can't help? He said, no. Your babies aren't going to get sick and they're not going to die. And he said, that is a fear-based teaching, that if you don't do this, something really bad's going to happen. He said, there are people who have a fear-based God, but it's not us. And anytime you run into fear-based teachings, he said, I will tell you that it is my belief that that is colonization and a history of influence from missionaries and people who come from a fear-based God. He said that, I know that you're really hungry and thirsty for your culture and that you're going to be going out there, you know, to as many ceremonies or doings as you can. So I'm going to give you some advice, he said. I want you to, whenever you show up at a ceremony or a cultural gathering, whatever it might be, I advise you to sit back at first and watch and listen. And this is what you watch for, and this is what you listen for. He said, if you see people saying, we're up here and you're down there, you know, only us people up here can have this really great contact with God, and you guys can't yet because you're not worthy yet. Or he said, if you see people that are being rigid and judgmental and excluding people who, like the woman that was yelling at you and swearing at you, he said, definitely that. Calling you names or shaming you, he said, I would suggest that you back up, and you probably don't want to be a part of whatever that is, because that's fear-based. And he said, but if you show up and you see people who are being kind and loving and compassionate, people who are explaining what they're doing, who are being inclusive, who are not shaming you, who are making you feel welcome, and if you make a mistake, you know, they're very kind and gentle. He went on and on about it, but he said, that's love-based. Then you probably want to stick around if you show up and that kind of stuff is going on. And I thought to myself at the time, because this is like 1980, and I thought, what elders sit around and talk about love-based and fear-based? This is so cool. I was just like, I loved it. And from that point on, that's what I did. I watched and I listened and I paid attention. And I also made a decision that someday when my hair got gray and I was a grandma and a great grandma, I was going to be like them. I was going to be kind and loving and gentle. And so that's how it started out. And I started, one of my early teachers also was Dorothy Sam. She would take us women out in the springtime. There's a tradition that was happening when I did finally meet a really great guy. And we had a whole bunch of kids. We had 10 kids, and we were raising them up near Bemidji, Minnesota. And Dorothy would go up to Red Lake in the springtime, and she would do this woman's fast. And I went there every year that I lived up there, as long as she was doing it. And it was the coolest thing. I'd never heard anybody talk about that before. But what she would do is have all the women all go out all at one time. And there would be like a big clearing somewhere. We would go in Red Lake near Adam Lusher's land. And all the women would spread out and have their own blanket with their bundles and their sacred items. And she instructed everyone, there would be silence from sun up to sundown. We got out there before the sun came up and found a spot. And she said for the whole time while the sun was going up until it got mid-sky, we would pray for everyone and everything. But for sure, we needed to pray for all the new life, the new plants, the new animals being born, the new babies being born. That was like the most important thing. We had to make sure that we were praying. But when you have a whole sun up to midday to pray, you can pray for a lot of things. So, and then when the sun was midday, then we had to listen until the sun was set. And that was something new to experience, to listen and learn to trust that. When there's total silence and you're sitting in nature, it's very powerful. It's the best spiritual experience I've ever had is doing that. And then we would, when we were done, when the sun went down, we would all go into sweat, the women sweat, and the women singing was so beautiful to this day. Women singing together is one of my very favorite things. I always get chills from it. I think it's beautiful and powerful. I've learned from my teachers that songs are a higher level of prayer and that it's really important to learn songs. So, and after the sweat, we would go inside and the men would have been cooking all day and then they served us. And it was their way of saying, we appreciate you and what you do and the power of your prayers. And it was very cool. That was a good experience in my early years to see that and experience that, I think. I experienced being doctored by Dorothy later in my life as well. I had cancer in my ovaries and my uterus, and she doctored me, and I also had a surgery, but I've been cancer-free ever since then. As a young woman, after starting to meet some people who were like healthy teachers, I joined an organization called the Women's Dance Health Project in Minneapolis. And it was a group of young Native women, all having babies. And we were learning how to be lay midwives, how to do home births. And while we were doing that, we were learning our language. We were learning how to chart our cycles. You know, in the course of a whole month or moon time, we were keeping track of when we felt up, when we felt down, when we had energy, when we didn't have energy. We were learning those teachings that you learn from nature, that in everything there's circles, seasons, and cycles. And when you know about them and you work with them instead of against them, you get a different result in your life. So also we were learning about, I think, how women were when we lived communally, because we all came together when a woman was having her baby, or at other times too, but especially around giving birth. And some of the women took care of the children, some cooked food, some kept the house clean, some were taking care of the woman as she's laboring and healing afterwards. The mother never had to worry about anything except breastfeeding her baby and healing up after she had a baby. A lot of us weren't in healthy relationships back then. And so these women would have had to do everything. If it wasn't for us all coming together like that and helping each other, that was another really beautiful experience. I felt that there is ceremony around birth and pregnancy that is so beautiful. Songs that you sing to your belly, you know, so that our children I'm trying to think of the right word. They make a connection to this side of life so that when they're born and then we sing those same songs, they know they're in the right place. And they recognize those songs and they feel at home. And that the women who are pregnant would get traditionally all the best and choicest foods. And knowing that that baby that was growing is our future and that everyone contributed to that. So yeah, I felt really blessed about what I learned during that time as well. And more of going to women's sweats and getting names for me and all my children. That was really powerful. I felt like I don't know how to explain it. If you do, for people who didn't grow up with a spirit name or an Indian name or Ojibwe name, in my example, once you get your name, there's something that happens to you that just like click, you know, the belonging feeling. It's very powerful. And I found this wonderful woman. Her name was Angie Northbird. And she knew, well, she was a fluent language speaker. I was maybe 20 and she was in her 80s, I think. And she knew about how it was before people lived in houses. And so I wanted to learn so much from her. So I would go bring her tobacco and sit and listen to her all the time. And she was teaching me how to say words around pregnancy and labor and birth and what are medicines. And but one of the things that she talked about, and this is another turning point for me, and you'll see why I am the way I am, because here's another example. Angie would get irritated by some of who, in her words, she called them rock stars. She goes, look at these men around here, you know, and this was in Minneapolis. She goes, they're going around talking like you can only get a name from me because I've been given the right. And she said, that's crap. She said, I remember what it was like before we lived in buildings. She said, there was no such thing. She said, we lived in extended family groups and we moved around to the seasonal camps. And when you had a baby, chances are you probably weren't, it wasn't during one of the big gatherings of the year. You know, like in the summertime, there'd be a big gathering where all the family groups would come together around ceremony usually. She said, so we would have our babies and it would be our extended family that was there. And so we just gave tobacco to someone in our extended family that we respected, and they gave a name, and there was no somebody's been given a right and they're the only one and all of that. She said it was, she would get crabby when she would hear people talk like that. And she said, so she said, my girl, you remember this. And there was another one of my friends, Leanne, who was sitting there with me that day when we heard her say that. So years later, after we had more babies, Leanne came to me with tobacco and she said, I want you to name my kids. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm not a name giver. I said, you know, I don't even know what you're talking about. And she's like, She said, I was sitting next to you listening to Angie Northbird say that you take tobacco to somebody in your extended family that you respect and they give a name. And she said, and you're my sister. And we called each other sister. And I was like, there was nothing I could say. I had to accept it. And she said, I don't want to go to any of these men because I can't find a man who hasn't exploited women, and I don't trust them. And so I'm giving this tobacco to you. And so I said, well, we'll see what happens. So I took that tobacco, and I had a pipe at that time, and I smoked the pipe with her tobacco. And guess what? Boom, boom, boom. Names came. And then I was like, because I would be like a doubting person. I would be like, really? Because I had in my head what I thought a name would be, for these children. And it wasn't any of the things I thought it was going to be. And I was like, really? Is that right? And then boom, the name would come back stronger. And I would be like, okay. And then at the naming ceremony, when it was revealed what the names were, every time it was like, oh my gosh, this is so perfect. It's so right on. How did you know? And I'd had to say, I didn't. I thought it was going to be Butterfly Woman or something. I did not think this. And I had to learn how to trust. And so I really had a hard time because of the way that I grew up and being told all the time that, you're worthless, you're no good, those kinds of battles. I've been in ceremony and therapy and recovery groups my whole life, really, for over 40 years. And but in the beginning, I was struggling with feeling worthy, and what if somebody comes along and says, you're a fraud, get out of here, or whatever. And I would have such hurt feelings and all this stuff. And I will tell you that there comes a time, or there did for me, when I felt like really I didn't have a choice, because I was having dreams about things that I was supposed to do, and I was resisting it. I would wake up from the dream and I would be like, no, I'm too afraid. I could do it, And then the next night I'd have the same dream again. And finally, this one time, and this was about the time that all my youngest children were just turning 18. And finally, that one night, this happened. I'll never forget it. I had the same dream, only this time, right at the end of the dream, it was like really loud. Just do it. And in my bedroom, I had all these pictures hanging up, tons of them, because I got a ton of kids and all that kind of stuff. And it was like someone grabbed me by the front of my pajamas and yanked me up, so I was upright, and at the same time saying, just do it. And then every single picture on every wall came crashing to the floor. And my eyes got about this big. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. But you have to send me teachers for these other things you want me to do. And sure enough, within 2 months, there were 4 women and 4 men who came into my life who started teaching me exactly what, and I didn't have to look for it. It just happened. That was one of the lessons I learned, is don't stress out that if you're supposed to do something, when you're supposed to do it, everything will be there. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to be like, oh, I'm not ready and trying to force something or anything like that. In my experience, it happens exactly the way that it's supposed to, when it's supposed to. And one of the other things that I heard all the time, and I would get really frustrated by it when I was young, was, the answers are all within, Sharyl. And I would be like, ah. But it's a journey, It's like, yeah, when you're a young person, that's hard. You don't know what you're doing, You got a lot of healing ahead of you. All the dysfunctional messages that you got, all the trauma or loss that you may have experienced, you have to learn how to process and heal, and your self-esteem and your self-confidence needs to grow. Yeah. Mindy, yeah, I know that one too. Did you put your SEMA out yet? That's like this reoccurring thing. Just keep putting that tobacco out. Keep putting your SEMA out. The answers will come, Sharyl. And they do. In my experience, they do. If you just keep an open mind and you keep praying about it, when you're not sure what to do, the guidance always comes. But part of what I was being prepared to do, and I will tell you that also, that I moved away from Bemidji at a certain point, and I could not find an elder who was doing women's fasts in the spring. And that always meant so much to me that I decided I'm just going to do it by myself. And also that I would do one in the fall, because it was the best thing that filled me up. And I thought, you know what, if we're praying for all the new life and the new growing things in the spring, I'm going to go do one in the fall and do all the thank yous for all of that wonderful new life and plants and medicines and all of that. So I started doing two, one in the spring and one in the fall. And it was so powerful. And then what happened was I got a phone call from, I don't know if any of you know about white bison or the Wellbriety movement, but every time I attended, about the year 2000, I was first introduced to Wellbriety. And I read the Red Road to Wellbriety book, and it blew me away. And I started doing a lot of work through Wellbriety curriculum. And everything I experienced with them, I had profound healing happen for me, very spiritually based, profound healing. And so every chance I had, if there was a doing somewhere that was Wellbriety, I always went. But I didn't know, the founder, Don Koyas. I just kind of had hero worship for him. But one day I had moved home to take care of my dad and my stepdad because they were both dying of cancer. And I thought, man, what am I going to do here? Because there's no jobs. I'm going to end up working at the gas station or something. And but then I get a phone call, and it was Don Koyas. And he said, how would you like to come and work for White Bison? I was like I fell on the floor. I said, oh my gosh, there's phenomenal women all over Turtle Island who are fabulous trainers and presenters. How in the heck did you ever think of me? And he said, there's a lot of people who are really gifted, he said, but they don't do their own work. He said, everything that I've ever heard about you is that you constantly work on yourself. You never stopped going to meetings. You never stopped therapy. You never stopped going to ceremony. And he said, that's what I want. And he said, we want to start having women-specific healing groups. And I'd like for you to come and help us do that. So I was like, oh my God. It was like a dream. So here I am flying all over the United States and Canada to all these tribes, helping women with recovery, with healing from trauma, healing from grief. It was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. And for any of you who might not know some of the things about Wellbriety, how it all started was with a gathering of 100 elders. And they talked about prophecies about times that were coming that were going to get really, really hard. And some of those prophecies said all four direction races were going to have to work together or humanity would not survive. They said that there's going to be an awakening of women. And to balance out the patriarchy that's taken over the world. And that there would be a balance of just as many women, medicine people, just as many women, spiritual people. And sadly, in our tribes on Turtle Island, the loss of that balance happened through colonization. That there was a time, if you go far enough back, where there was a balance with women. And they said, that's going to have to happen again. And women are going to start dreaming, and they're going to start gifts are going to start coming to them. And that's one of the ways that you're going to know that it's getting closer to this really important time. And so as I'm learning all of these things and I'm traveling all over to these Native and tribal communities, guess what women are doing? They're coming up to me and they're saying, some of them were crying and they were saying, Sharyl, I don't know what's happening to me. I'm having all these dreams. They're telling me I have to do this stuff. And then I would just smile because that was my experience. And I didn't even have to tell them. So I do want to share one last really important thing, because also this is very meaningful to me. And I will tell you, and I should have done this disclaimer at the beginning, because everything that I'm sharing with you about ceremony or beliefs or teachings, I can't speak for anybody else. I can only speak for what I was taught and what I've learned. I had a big eye-opening experience that happened to me around elders and teachings. So at the time I was working at the Cass Lake Family Center, and we were trying to get information about how to do a traditional funeral. And I'm trying to think of what the community was in Leech Lake that was like the most, like, you know how every reservation has the one community that's the most traditional? Like Panema and Red Lake, or I'm trying to think of Leech Lake. Is it like Pennington, or I can't quite remember now. Anyways, so we were advised to check with several of these different elders, right? And so I go with tobacco and I asked this one elder, and they're really serious, and they said, okay, this is what you need to know. The first 4 days after somebody dies, cry. Get all your crying out. Do it. Because then after the 4th day, you got to stop, and that's it. You can't cry after that. Well, then I went to the next elder, and the elder said, okay, listen, this is really important. The first 4 days, you can't cry. After that, you can cry all you want. And I walked away. I didn't say anything because I'm just being respectful, right? But I thought, holy smokes, here. These elders are the same tribe, the same community, and they just told me 2 completely respected elders, completely opposite teachings. And I thought, and my experience has played out, if you ask 5 elders the same question, you're probably going to get 5 different answers. When I hear Paybom talking about there is no wrong way, or there is no one right way, or whatever, that resonates with me because I've been around and I listen and I pay attention. And what I stick with is, if something feels right in your bones when you hear it, and if I pray about it and it keeps telling me that, Paybom talks about going to Shake Tent. If you have a spiritual question, and that's a place you can trust answers. And that's happened to me as well. I did go to Shake Tent once. So that leads up to what I'm going to tell you now, which is, I would say, probably the most controversial thing I have to tell you. I know that Mindy knows what I'm going to say. I don't always share this, but if I get asked to share what my beliefs are, then I share it. So while I'm traveling all over, for 10 years, I did that work. I traveled, flew in and out of Native communities. And I was up in London, Ontario. I had just finished a women's training on healing from trauma. And everyone was leaving, and I was getting ready to head back to the airport. And there was a woman and her really elderly mother that wanted to talk to me. And the daughter was kind of interpreting some of it, because the mom, her first language was Ojibwe, and some words she couldn't, translate as well. So the daughter was helping. And so she said, and they hadn't been at the training. I didn't know where they came from. But you know, of course I'm being respectful and, oh, you know, sure, I have a few minutes. And she said, we heard that you travel all over Turtle Island and that you work with women. And I said, yeah, I do. I'm really blessed. And that is the work that I do. And she said, well, my mother wanted to come here and talk to you because the women in our family have kept an oral history for like maybe 400 years, from the time before first contact with the first Europeans, the first fur traders and voyagers that were coming in. And she said, because we knew there would come a day when it would be important what they were, the teachings that they were keeping. And she said, there's a lot of things that are being said today about that's our tradition, that it isn't accurate. She said, sometimes there's little seeds of it, little pieces of accuracy in it. And so that's what she wanted to talk to me about. And she said, before the European people came, it was true that when you were on your moon time or your menstrual cycle, you got to have a separate lodge. But what the reason for that lodge was because we knew that prayers from women during that time, because of their connection with Grandmother Moon, they're very powerful during that time. And so this was a time when women could go and rest, you know, follow those seasons and cycles and know that this is a time when they need more rest, and that it would be a time when they could pray and meditate, and the other women would pick up, you know, where they left off, and help take care of the rest of the family. And that she said that, but here's where a lot of the very, you know, stuff starts to shift and change, because she said back then, if you were on your moon time, they wanted you to do the ceremony. And back then there was just as many women spiritual leaders and just as many women doctors as there were men. And because your prayers are so much more powerful, they wanted you to touch the sacred items. They wanted you to do the ceremony. It wasn't what they're saying now. And she said, and I will tell you when it changed. She said, they started bringing black robes. And those black robes were talking about their father, about this God that everyone needed to follow. And they said, and if you look back 400 years ago, what the teachings of the Catholic Church were in Europe, because I went and checked this out, was spot on. They were saying that women on their menstrual cycle are dirty, and the reason why is because their spiritual power is like tainted, because we have the seed of Eve in us. And Eve, when was so powerful, and what she did was she talked Adam into eating the apple, right? And then, and so they were teaching, be very afraid of women's spirituality, because they will skew it. They will get men to, you know, do what they shouldn't be doing and all this stuff. And they said that, and actually, women are not equal. They said, men are up here and women are down here. And women are the property of men. This was the teaching back then. Stay away from women on their menstrual time. They can make you sick. All of these things they were teaching. And so this woman that came to talk to me, she said, there was a certain element of men who started paying attention to what they were saying, and they started liking that thought. Instead of sharing the power with the women, if they are my property, I can do what I want with them. And maybe I would like that. And so she said more and more of them, because where they would have access to those black robes was when they would have those big, like, summer gatherings. And so those missionaries would come there. And she said, and then going back home to our extended family seasonal camps, some of the men going back would say, okay, from now on, this is how we're going to do it. This new God is powerful, and not necessarily for the right reasons, but start to say, we can't really trust the women. The men should be doing the spiritual stuff. Women on their menstrual cycle, when their prayers are powerful, we better set them off to the side and tell them, you're too powerful. You got to go over there, because if you're around us when you're on your time, you're going to throw everything off for the men. You know, our men's spirituality won't work all of a sudden, and you're going to make everybody sick. And she said gradually more and more people, and then more missionaries came, and then the residential schools came, and pretty soon everyone, it's been for hundreds of years now. So then people are saying, oh, this is our tradition. And you women, we don't want you to feel bad. We're not saying you're bad. We're just saying you're so strong spiritually that you're going to make everybody sick and wreck everything. And she said, and this elder lady, I could tell she was just like getting really passionate about it. And she said she was trying to say a word, and I knew what she was meaning was oxymoron, because you can't be spiritually strong and hurt anybody or anything. And as soon as she said that, I felt it in my bones. I felt the truth of what she was saying in my bones. And I thought, she was so right. Because if you are spiritually strong, you don't hurt anything. I knew that never made sense to me. My whole life I was hearing that, oh, you women, don't feel bad. You know, you can't be in the circle and you can't be in the ceremony because you're so spiritually strong. You're going to make everything, go bad, and you're going to make everybody sick. But you're not bad, really. You're just spiritually strong. Only women spiritually strong. Men can be spiritually strong and everything's good. Women get spiritually strong and then it makes everything go bad. And that never made sense to me. And so here's the kicker. So she said, we knew the women in our family way back then because some of our men were the ones who decided they wanted to do this new way. And she said, we made a pact with the women in our family that we would keep the knowledge of what it really was before and keep passing it down from women to women and women in our family. And she said, the women in my family today, they got together, they heard about you, and they decided, we want to tell you, and now you got to go tell everybody else. And I was like, no, don't do this to me. All the culture police are going to attack me, and people are going to get so mad at me. But you know what? The crazy thing is that I seriously, I went home and I was depressed for like 6 months because I didn't want to do it. But I would say 90% of the time, if I end up sharing that story and my belief in it, I get a really positive feedback from women about it. And what I decided with that was that I would never tell anybody else how they had to do things. I know for me, if I have a sweat and it's got to be my own, I can't be using somebody else's lodge because then you have to follow their protocol. But if I have a sweat or I have a ceremony or I have a talking circle and you are on your time, I will bring my eagle feather to you. I want you to hold it. I want you to touch my pipe. I want you to be in my ceremony. In fact, if you want to run it, I would want you to, because in my spirit, in my bones, I know the truth of what that elder woman told me. And I can't go back. I can't go backwards. But if I'm at somebody else's talking circle or sweat or ceremony, I follow their protocol. And I believe that that's how it should be. I will respect that. But if I'm doing it, and I warn people about that. If you're not comfortable with that, it's okay. You don't, I will understand and do what feels comfortable for you, But yeah, so I know my time is up, so I have to wind down here. But I was so happy that Mindy asked me to speak, and I have a chance because that elder woman, she asked me to, she said, please share with as many women as you can. And just to know that all of us are born worthy. Just by being born, we are worthy of everything. We are a people that have a direct connection to Creator, and we don't need a middleman to do that. We never have. We've had spiritual leaders who teach us things that help us grow our relationship with Creator. There's always value in our spiritual leaders and our teachers, but that's not how we have our connection. It's direct. And so if you are spending time listening and you're going out in nature and spending time being quiet, things will start to come to you. Dreams will come to you. Gifts will come to you. And that balance that needs to be righted, that, patriarchy threw everything out of whack. Those elders also said it was connected to the fate of the earth, that our mother, the earth, how she's being treated is tied to how women are being treated. And when one gets better, they both will get better. So that work is really important. We have to learn about our songs and our ceremonies and our teachings, but always, I say, like Kendall and Lillian told me, love-based. Love-based is our guide. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anybody had any questions or comments. You could unmute yourself.